Bob Dylan stopped playing guitar, closed his eyes, and the room held its breath. No one understood what was happening, but everyone felt that something had changed forever. The Fox Theater in Detroit. November 1978. 2,000 people packed into velvet seats, waiting in the semi-darkness for what they'd paid to see, Bob Dylan, live, performing songs they'd memorized, sung along to, built their lives around. The stage lights were warm. Amber and gold. Old tungsten bulbs throwing long shadows. Dylan stood at the microphone in his vest and jeans, acoustic guitar hanging from his shoulder, that familiar silhouette America had been watching for 17 years. He was 41 minutes into the set. He'd played the expected songs. The crowd had sung along where they always did. Everything was proceeding exactly as a Bob Dylan concert should proceed. He was 3 verses into Tangled Up in Blue when his fingers stopped moving on the strings. Not a pause. Not a transition. A full stop. The music died mid-phrase. His right hand lifted away from the guitar and hung in the air for a moment, then dropped to his side. His left hand slipped off the fretboard. His eyes closed. The room went silent. 2,000 people holding their breath, uncertain if this was part of the performance, or something else entirely. The stage lights continued their slow rotation. Cigarette smoke drifted through the beams. Time seemed to suspend itself. Dylan didn't move. Didn't speak. Just stood there, eyes closed, guitar hanging silent against his chest, microphone inches from his face. 5 seconds passed. Then 10. Then 15. Someone in the balcony coughed. The sound echoed through the theater like a gunshot. Dylan didn't explain himself. He never did. To understand what happened in that moment, you need to understand what had happened 6 hours earlier. Dylan had arrived at the Fox Theater at 4 in the afternoon. Early for a sound check. Unusual for him. He typically showed up 30 minutes before showtime, tuned his guitar in the dressing room, walked on stage, performed, left. Minimal interaction. Maximum distance. But today he'd come early. His tour manager, Victor Mahmouds, noticed but didn't comment. That was the job, notice everything, say nothing unless asked. Dylan went to his dressing room. A small space backstage with a couch, a mirror surrounded by bulbs, a table with coffee and fruit no one ever touched. He sat down with his guitar and didn't play it. Just held it. Stared at the strings. At 4:45, there was a knock on the door. "Yeah," Dylan said, not looking up. The door opened. A young woman stood there, maybe 22, wearing a Fox Theater staff shirt. Nervous. "Mr. Dylan? There's someone here to see you. He doesn't have a pass, but he says you know him." Dylan looked up for the first time. "Who?" "He says his name is Michael Drayton." "He says you wrote a song for him?" "In 1963. The guitar almost slipped from Dylan's hands. Michael Drayton. That name pulled Dylan backward through 15 years in an instant. To 1963. To Greenwich Village. To the person he'd been before fame turned him into something he didn't recognize. Michael Drayton had been a folk singer. Not famous. Not even close. He played the same coffee houses as Dylan, Gerd's Folk City, the Gaslight, tiny rooms where 50 people was a good crowd. He was older than Dylan by maybe 10 years. Quiet. Serious about the music in a way that had nothing to do with ambition. They'd sat together one night in 1963, after Dylan had played a set and Michael had played after him. 2 a.m. in a diner on Bleecker Street. Coffee and cigarettes. Michael had a notebook, always writing, always working on something. "You're gonna be huge," Michael had said, not with jealousy, just observation. "I can hear it. You've got that thing people need right now." Dylan had shrugged, uncomfortable with the assessment. "You're good too." "I'm a folk singer," Michael said, smiling sadly. "You're something else. You're gonna speak for people who can't speak for themselves. That's different. That's responsibility." They talked until dawn. About music. About what it meant to be heard. About the weight of other people's expectations. Before they parted, Michael had handed Dylan a piece of paper. Lyrics he'd been working on. "I can't finish this," he'd said. "It doesn't want to be mine. Maybe it's yours." Dylan had taken the paper, folded it, put it in his jacket pocket. 2 weeks later, he turned those lyrics into a song. Changed some words. Added a melody. Made it his own the way he made everything his own. The song became one of his most covered works. Other artists recorded it. It appeared in movies. It became part of the American songbook. Dylan never told anyone where the first draft came from. Never credited Michael Drayton. That was how it worked in those days. Ideas were shared, borrowed, transformed. Nobody kept careful track. Nobody copyrighted napkin scribbles. Michael had never asked for credit. Had never even mentioned it again. Dylan had seen him maybe twice more in 1964, briefly, in passing. Then Michael had disappeared from the village scene. Dylan assumed he'd quit music. Most people did. The dream wore them down, and they went back to regular jobs, regular lives. And now, 15 years later, Michael Drayton was standing backstage at the Fox Theater in Detroit, asking to see him. Dylan set down his guitar carefully. "Send him in." The young woman nodded and left. 30 seconds later, Michael walked through the door. He looked older. Of course he did. They all did. But there was something else, a thinness, a frailness that had nothing to do with age. His hands shook slightly. His face was too pale. "Bob," Michael said, his voice hoarse. "I'm sorry to just show up. I tried calling your management, but they said you don't take calls from." "Sit down," Dylan interrupted, gesturing to the couch. "You want coffee?" "No. Thank you." Michael sat slowly, carefully, like movement hurt. "I don't have much time. I'm only in Detroit for treatment. Medical thing. But I saw you were playing tonight, and I thought I needed to see you." Dylan sat in the chair across from him. Waited. He'd learned long ago that silence got you further than questions. "I'm dying," Michael said simply. "Lung cancer. Stage 4. They gave me maybe 3 months. Probably less." The dressing room mirror bulbs hummed. Somewhere down the hall, someone was doing a sound check. Bass notes thudding through the walls. "I'm sorry," Dylan said, and meant it. Michael smiled, that same sad smile from 15 years ago. "I'm not here for sympathy. I'm here because I wanted to tell you something before I can't anymore." "Okay. That song. The one I gave you the lyrics for in '63. You remember?" Dylan nodded slowly. "I heard it on the radio last month. Some new artist covering it. Beautiful version. And I thought..." Michael's voice cracked. "I thought, that's the only thing I made that's gonna outlive me. Those words. And nobody will ever know I wrote them." The silence stretched out. "And I realized," Michael continued, "I don't care. I don't need them to know. Because you made those words matter. You gave them the melody that made people listen. You put them out into the world where they could help people. That's what I wanted. I just wanted to make something that mattered." He looked at Dylan directly. "I came here to tell you thank you. For taking what I started and making it bigger than I ever could have. For carrying it forward. That's what we're supposed to do, right? Pass things along. Make them better." Dylan's throat was tight. "Michael. I don't want credit," Michael said firmly. "I don't want anything except for you to know that I'm grateful. You gave my words a life I never could have given them. And when I'm gone, they'll still be out there, in that song, helping people feel less alone. That's enough. That's more than enough. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most important part of this story is still unfolding." Michael Drayton left the dressing room 10 minutes later. They shook hands at the door. Dylan watched him walk slowly down the hallway, one hand trailing along the wall for balance, and disappear around a corner. Dylan sat back down with his guitar. He picked out the melody of that song. The one that had started with Michael's words on a piece of paper in a diner 15 years ago. The one Dylan had claimed as his own without ever acknowledging where it began. He thought about responsibility. About what Michael had said that night in 1963, "You're gonna speak for people who can't speak for themselves." For 17 years, Dylan had been running from that responsibility. And yet he'd come here, in his final months, not to demand recognition but to say thank you. At 8 p.m., Dylan walked on stage. Performed the expected songs. Sang the familiar lyrics. Let the crowd have what they paid for. 41 minutes in, he started. Tangled up in blue. 3 verses in, his mind drifted to Michael Drayton. To the diner in 1963. To the piece of paper with lyrics written in someone else's handwriting. To all the unacknowledged voices that had helped build the songs people thought were purely his. To the weight of carrying other people's words and making them your own. To the responsibility Michael had named 15 years ago. And Dylan couldn't do it anymore. Couldn't keep pretending the music came from nowhere but himself. Couldn't keep performing without acknowledging what it cost. Who it cost. So he stopped playing. His fingers lifted off the strings. The music died. His eyes closed. The Fox Theater held its breath. Away from the spotlight, Dylan made a choice no one expected. For 30 seconds, Dylan stood motionless on that stage. Eyes closed. Guitar silent. 2,000 people waiting for an explanation that wouldn't come. Then, slowly, he opened his eyes. He looked out at the audience. At the faces watching him in the semi-darkness. Waiting. Always waiting for him to give them something. "This next song," Dylan said, his voice rough, quieter than the microphone was designed to carry. "I didn't write alone." The audience shifted. Uncertain. "A man gave me the words in 1963. He was a folk singer. Better than me in a lot of ways. He never got famous. Never asked for credit. But those words, they mattered. And tonight I found out he's dying." The silence in the Fox Theater was absolute. "His name is Michael Drayton," Dylan continued. "And he came here today to thank me for making his words into a song. But I should have thanked him 15 years ago." Dylan adjusted the guitar strap on his shoulder. "I'm gonna play that song now. And I want you to know it didn't come from me alone. Nothing ever does. We all stand on someone else's words. Someone else's melody. Someone else's courage to start something they couldn't finish." He began to play. Not "Tangled Up in Blue," the song that had started with Michael's words. Slow. Deliberate. Every note weighted with acknowledgement. The audience listened in reverent silence. Some cried. Most just understood they were witnessing something that transcended performance. What followed stayed with everyone who witnessed it, long after the sound faded. When Dylan finished, he set the guitar down gently against the mic stand. He didn't say anything else. Didn't wait for applause. Just walked off stage into the wings. The crowd sat in stunned silence for 5 seconds. Then they rose. Standing ovation that lasted 4 minutes. For Dylan. For Michael. For the invisible people whose work lives in other people's songs. Michael Drayton died 6 weeks later in a hospice in Cleveland. Dylan sent flowers to the funeral. On the card he wrote only, "The words were always yours." Share and subscribe. Some stories deserve to be remembered. In every concert after that night, Dylan introduced at least one song with, "I didn't write this alone." Sometimes he named names. Sometimes he didn't. But he always acknowledged the ghosts. The guitar he played that night in Detroit stayed in his dressing room. He never used it on stage again. He kept it as a reminder that stopping the music, just for a moment, to tell the truth was the bravest thing he'd ever done.